publishing in terms of citations, exposure to your research, and of course greater impact influence of the research and through collaborations and many other aspects. But I won't talk about this more, of course. I'm open to any questions. But I want to talk about what how open access extends into open science, and for myself as an editor, what I can influence and how I can support the research community is primarily in practicing open science. And so, just to set the scene, the kinds of things that we as editors can do is we can encourage preprint deposition. Nature itself has been completely okay with preprinting of papers ever since Archive was created, which is some 20 years ago. Of course, we're a multidisciplinary journal. We all know that preprinting has taken off more recently in the life sciences than even more recently in biomedical sciences. And so while we used to be just supportive of our authors depositing preprints, now we actually actively encourage them. And when the COVID pandemic started, we actually mandated deposition of preprints for all COVID-related papers at the point of submission to us, because we wanted that information to be available without any delay. We encourage and in some fields mandate data deposition. Without that, we will not publish your papers. We include a compulsory data availability statement in every paper to increase transparency around this. We encourage code sharing and facilitate code peer review via Code Ocean, who is an independent organization with which we partnered, and I'll give you an example of that in a minute. We encourage protocol sharing. For example, we have mentioned protocols, but we're completely agnostic as to which platform you share your protocols through. In the interest of transparency, which I see very much related to open research and open science, we offer transparent peer review, whereby reviewers' comments and the authors' responses are published with the published article. The way it works on Nature is that the authors have an opportunity to veto, so have an opportunity to opt out. All reviewers who review for us know that unless the authors opt out, their referees' comments will be published with a published paper. Within the Nature portfolio, this practice started with Nature Communications quite some time ago, and very recently they actually extended their transparent peer review model to be mandatory. So you cannot, as an author at Nature Communications, you cannot now opt out. And then just a word, maybe not so directly related to open research, but given the forum we're here, we across the journals work with early career researchers in mentorship programs around peer review for a number of reasons. One is that we want to diversify our peer review pools. We want a diversity of opinions on research that we consider for publication. And another one, actually, we want to share the expertise that editors gain through managing round after round of peer review, and share that with early career researchers who may just be starting out on their journey. So just a few examples, and I will run through this quite quickly. So indeed, back in 2019, we changed our policy to encourage authors to deposit preprints at submission, and that's actually a Springer Nature-wide policy, not just for Nature on the Nature portfolio. As I mentioned already, we can facilitate data peer review and sharing. So I mentioned earlier that we encourage, and in some fields we mandate, and the reason why I say in some fields, because of course you represent a diversity of fields, of disciplines. You know that different disciplines are at a different stage towards practicing data sharing, and one of the aspects that determines which stage you're at is infrastructure. So, for example, my original discipline in which I did research and on which I focused for many years as an editor, genomics, has a fantastic infrastructure for data sharing, and in genomics we mandate data sharing. So we will not publish a paper without shared data in these papers. Now, there are disciplines in which there are no structured repositories for data. There are, in fact, many of those disciplines. And so we worked together with Figshare, which is an unstructured repository, and we've actually now developed a way to enable Figshare data deposition as part of the submission process to one of our journals. So to help support the authors to share the data. And the data will then sit in the Springer Nature part of Figshare, and the data will remain there whether the paper is published with a Springer Nature journal or not. So in the case of DOI, it can be cited, it's a permanent record, it's an independent record in Figshare. And so this just goes through this example in more detail, and of course it enables two things. It enables, because this deposition of data happens at submission, it enables reviewers to more appropriately review the paper together with the data. The link is immediately available there. And at this point, if the authors choose to do so, these data can be available only for reviewers until the paper is published. And then indeed, of course, after publication, if the permissions need to be reset, they will be reset. The data set remains and is linked with the publication in the paper. Analogously, we want to support code sharing. Of course, code sharing does not, or the usage of code in publication does not apply to every single paper, but it does apply increasingly to many different aspects of research. So quite some time as a pilot, we have partnered with an organization called CodeOcean. CodeOcean provides an environment, if you like, a container tool in which your code can be run on the appropriate data set. This capsule is then presented to the reviewers, so analogously to the way I was talking about the data, this code can be reviewed in the environment in which it can run on the data that are suitable. And then when the paper is published, again this capsule is published with the paper, so that the readers can play around with it, play with the parameters, understand the process, the analysis that the authors went through to arrive at their conclusions. So I mentioned a few of the things which are listed on this slide, such as, for example, data and code availability already. I mentioned protocol sharing, which is, of course, an important aspect of open science. Another aspect of open science, which, again, to me, very much links with research integrity and reproducibility of research, is the support that we provide to authors through our reporting summaries. So these are reporting summaries which have been developed with the research communities to prompt the authors to report the parameters with which they've done their research, and then in turn, for the reviewers and the readers, help them sort of at a glance or easily evaluate the rigor with which the research was done. And I want to just spend a couple of words speaking on transparency. We don't just want to require transparency of our authors, we want our own processes to have an element of transparency as well. So we have, back in 2020, we have started a trial on Nature to publish referee reports, just as I mentioned, Nature Communications did before. And the trial has ended in the sense that we have now adopted this. Majority of our authors are happy to have the referee reports published. I should just say that this does not mean that the referee reports are signed. So that still remains at the discretion of the reviewer. They can choose whether to sign their reports or not, but their reports, the actual text and the rebuttals will be available. Incidentally, to acknowledge the reviewers, we do thank them by name if they choose to be named, or anonymously at the end of the manuscript. So we insert a sort of thank you note, and that's not at the discretion of the author. So we want to thank the reviewers, but whether they're named or not is down to them. Part of the open research practice, I think, as well as transparency, is also the fairness of it. I talked about this yesterday, so I won't talk about it again. Just very briefly, again, about open science and transparency and rigor, which are very closely linked in my mind. I want to just mention retractions, extremely contentious topic, which shouldn't be, in my view. All too often, retractions are viewed as being synonymous with lack of research rigor, whereas most majority of retractions are not because of scientific fraud, for some other reasons. And here I'm just showing you an example of how a retraction can add to transparency of research. A particular paper associated with the retraction note. The retraction note itself explains the whole process that led to the retraction, linking to the discussion on archive between the authors, but also members of the community. And subsequently, this paper actually was published in another journal. I think that's an important illustration of transparent and open scientific practice. And in closing, I will I will mention again something I mentioned in my talk yesterday, and that is help with the cost of publishing. We talked a lot about the cost of publishing in the first part of the session. And so indeed, earlier this year, Springer Nature announced a fund to cover the cost of APCs in Nature and the research journals in the Nature portfolio, and that applies to the countries that are defined as lower middle-income countries, as defined by the World Bank. And the final thing I will mention is, in the earlier presentations, we talked about, or panelists talked about, alternative ways of getting access to publications which are not open access. And Sci-Hub featured on the list, and yet Research for Life didn't. And I find it quite curious that, let's face it, an illegal operation can create so much PR for itself that a completely legal collaborative effort, which Research for Life is, in which many publishers participate, including Springer Nature, so all of Springer Nature's content, which is not open access, is completely freely available in low and middle-income countries through Research for Life. Nobody in this group I have spoken to about this knows about Research for Life, and yet it's not a new organization. It's quite interesting for me, and I clearly have no interest in promoting Research for Life, apart from the fact that content in my journal is available through Research for Life, for example, to researchers in Rwanda. And similarly, so it's not just our content, but it's also our training. So we have a Nature Masterclasses, which is an extensive process of training available online on how to write papers, how to review papers, how to write grants, etc., etc. And all these masterclasses, the whole program is freely available in low and middle-income countries through Research for Life. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
It's really great to be here at the Global Young Academy Annual General Meeting. It's a fantastic audience. It's a great group of people. I am delighted to have the opportunity to speak to you about our experiences at PLOS and increasing equitable participation in open science. So for those of you who may not know, PLOS is a non-profit, fully open access science publisher. We have a mission to empower researchers to accelerate the progress in research transformation by accelerating progress in scholarly communication by leading a transformation in research communication. We strive for openness and transparency throughout the research communication lifecycle because we know that there are benefits to knowledge dissemination, and we also really appreciate how openness and transparency support trust in research. So, let me just here repeat. So I want to start today with the definition of open science, which is, we use the UNESCO definition in our work. It has equitable participation baked into its very core. So it defines open science as a combination of practices that contribute to making knowledge more available, more accessible, and more reproducible. And open science applies to all disciplines, not just those in STEM fields, and it highlights points that are really central to PLOS's approach to open access publishing. So from its inception in 2000, PLOS has been focused on catalyzing broad-scale systemic change in scholarly communication. And what we have learned is that change is possible. And over the past 20 years, we've been able to prove the viability of open access models, which is now mainstream for many publishers. And via my journal, PLOS One, we've shown that we've actually catalyzed change in the publishing landscape by showing that a multidisciplinary journal that prioritizes rigor and ethics over kind of the hotness or the excitement of the research findings is a viable strategy. So we've also helped focus the conversation about peer review on rigor and transparency, and we've also demonstrated the importance of openly available data through our mandatory data deposition policy. But along the way, we've also learned important lessons about building an equitable open access publishing system. And the first and probably most important to this group, as judging by conversations that I've heard already, is around the article processing charges or the article publication charges. We know that these are exclusionary. We know that they represent a barrier to inclusion in knowledge sharing. We've also learned over the past 20 years that intermediary outputs like data and code, protocols, review reports, these all have intrinsic value and they should be shared. We've also learned that it's really important to focus on the research question and the quality by which that research was executed, instead of subjective assessments of results. And so addressing these three things that we've learned, we feel is key to building an equitable system of open access publishing. So I want to talk about the APC first, the giant elephant in the room. So we need to move beyond the APC. It's a business model that's focused on just one output, which is the research paper, and it's the predominant model right now in open access publishing. But it's not appropriate for selected titles because the costs are too high, and it limits the availability for authors who can't afford to pay APCs that are thousands of dollars. So at PLOS, we've developed a couple of different solutions to this, and this is an area of active experimentation and active investment in PLOS. The first solution here is CAP, which is Community Action Publishing. And it's offered on our more selective titles, including PLOS Biology, PLOS Medicine, and PLOS Sustainability and Transformation. And so what CAP is a one annual fee that offers unlimited publishing in these three titles. The fee is based on publishing activity of an institution, and profit margin is kept. The other publishing model that we've recently developed in the past 2 years is what's called global equity. And this is an annual publication fee, and that's based on the World Bank lending tier plus the institutional's historic publication output. The global equity model is capped at $6,600, again, for an institution, so the one fee for an institution is $6,600. That allows unlimited publishing, and that's only in the highest World Bank lending tiers with the most publishing activity. And I should also note that, as Magdalena mentioned, researchers who are in research-for-life countries have access to both of these models for free. So there is no APC, there is no paperwork, there's nothing. They're just automatically included in both of these models for free. So in the same way that we are trying to uncouple payment of an article to improve access and equity, we're also moving away from the idea that publishing is a one-time event that ends in a published article. So we're supporting a publication process that better mirrors how research is actually conducted. And this is things through registered reports, which were mentioned yesterday again by Magdalena, where the protocol is reviewed, you get detailed reviewer comments, and then you receive an accepted principle for the study. We also, encourage preprint deposition. We obviously publish peer-reviewed articles, and we also publish reviewer reports that the authors elect to make them openly available. We support, in fact, mandate data sharing and support code sharing for other journals. We offer ability to publish methods and protocols, and then obviously we also have a really robust post-publication correction and retraction process as well. And excitingly, we also have new ways to update papers in some of our journals after the paper is accepted for publication. So what this all means is that we have like a linked digital stack of contributions. It's not just one static article, and each contribution here is then independently citable, it's reusable, and it can be shared more broadly. So the third pillar of building a more equitable ecosystem is how we evaluate research, right? So especially research that's submitted to selected journals. So talk about PLOS One first. PLOS One is not a selected journal, right? We aim to be a home for all rigorously conducted and ethically sound research. But you know, we've also taken steps to change how research is evaluated by introducing a couple of new article types. We rolled out registered report protocols, or registered reports, a couple of years ago. And more recently, we've also launched study protocols. And these publication outputs allow authors to get feedback on their study at a very early stage and can potentially improve the chances, especially with registered reports, when you get the exhibit principle, can potentially improve the chances that research is then published. It's also an independent, citable output that shows, you know, the community what you're interested in working on, opens up opportunities for collaboration, and can be cited and documented in future work. But we've also found that inclusive publication criteria are possible for selected